What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we're going to go over the top 18 tight ends as we head into week 4. We'll let you know a bit about each player's matchup, talk about their floor and their ceiling, so you know exactly which player you want to start on Sunday. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was through 3 weeks, which running back has the most rushing yards over expectation per carry? The correct answer was Sony Michel. Congratulations to John Jacobs, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which wide receiver currently leads the league in yards after catch per reception? Once again, that's which wide receiver currently leads the league in yards after catch per reception. Leave your answer in the comments section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, keep in mind, this is not a rankings video. We are going to be touching on all players, but if you do have 2 tight ends that you value very similarly and are not sure who to start, we would definitely recommend going to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's exactly where you'll find the rankings. It will let you know exactly which player we would start over the other. Members of our website also gain access to benefits like waiver wire ads, including fab suggestions, droppable players list, access to the trade model, top DFS plays, sports betting picks, and more. So if that interests you, once again, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With that out of the way though, let's hop right into the video. Up on the screen, you'll see the top 6 tight ends we have ranked for the week. Leading the list, of course, Travis Kelce. Only problem with Kelce this week, of course, is that Cam Newton did test positive for COVID. Word was that this game will now be postponed to Monday or Tuesday. If that were the case, 100% guaranteed, I would be completely fine just waiting for him. Playing Kelce in this matchup doesn't scare me whatsoever. I know Darren Waller had a poor performance against this team last week, but this is Travis Kelce we're talking about. Patrick Mahomes will find a way to get him the ball. My only concern though is that, like we saw with the Titans game versus the Steelers game, also being noted to be postponed, we saw the end result being that the game was actually canceled for this week and both teams would be taking a bye week. If we're relying on Travis Kelce filling out our tight end slot and then all of a sudden that's the news that we get, I'm not sure what rules your league will have in place to make up for that, but you very well might get a 0 in your TE slot. For a player like Travis Kelce who makes up a pretty safe chunk of your production on your team, I'm not sure I'd be willing to risk that, but if all goes as planned right now, the game is just postponed, we definitely have him ranked in the top 5. The next tight end we have is Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. He's coming off of 2 disappointing performances after an explosion in week 1. Understandably, people are probably a bit concerned. While we can't say last game his poor performance was all on him, he definitely had some drops and didn't make some plays we typically saw him make. But even considering all of those factors, it's not enough for us to just drop him in the rankings or consider playing another player who is a lower tier tight end over him. We still have him ranked inside the top 6. He faces Washington this week, who ranks 27th in fantasy points allowed to the position. They've allowed 3 touchdowns through 3 games. In week 1, they allowed 11 receptions for 119 yards to the Eagles as well. So if there were a game for Andrews to come back and have another boom type performance, this definitely would be the one. The next tight end we have is Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles, as it stands today, have lost virtually all of their receiving weapons. Even Dallas Goedert, who was a pretty surprising bright spot in the early part of this season, is now on IR. Richard Rodgers is presumably going to take that Dallas Goedert role. How much trust will Carson Wentz have in Richard Rodgers is probably not going to be as high as it would be if Dallas Goedert was still on the field. This instantly boosts the floor and the ceiling of Zach Ertz, meaning he, even against San Francisco, is virtually an auto start. The matchup against San Francisco though, it doesn't bring a ton of upside in itself. Through 3 games this season, they've only allowed 7 total receptions. They have yet to allow a receiving touchdown to a tight end, and while they haven't had the best competition when it comes to tight ends against this defense, Evan Engram just a week ago posted a modest total of just 3 receptions for 22 yards on 5 targets. Regardless though, I'm fairly confident that Zach Ertz will post the best tight end performance over any tight end so far this season against San Francisco. Our expectations do have to be that the ceiling should be relatively low, and we're not sure how well this offense will play overall, but his involvement in the offense, the expected volume he's going to receive, it does warrant a top 5 ranking. On the other side of the ball, we have George Kittle, the next tight end on our list. This will be his first game back since being injured. He carries no injury designation heading into this matchup. It appears that the San Francisco 49ers have played it safe enough so that now that he is back, it's presumed he is as healthy as he could be, meaning that top-end production from George Kittle that we have become accustomed to is something that we can expect in this matchup. The Philadelphia Eagles are a very beatable defense when it comes to tight ends. Think Tyler Higbee in week 2, a game in which he scored 3 receiving touchdowns, well over 20 points. While I'm not calling for George Kittle to have such an amazing game like that is well within his range of outcomes. Just keep in mind they will have Deebo Samuel back, unsure of exactly what type of snaps we'll see from him, but Brandon Ayuk did prove himself to be a contributor last week, so this offense will have other weapons outside of him, but a solid performance from Kittle is what we should expect nonetheless. The next tight end we have is Darren Waller of the Las Vegas Raiders. Waller is coming off of his worst performance of the season. He posted 2 receptions for 9 receiving yards, no touchdown, an all-around disappointing performance even when considering it was against the Patriots. While I'm sure the Patriots did everything they could to limit Waller's production, knowing he was one of their best offensive weapons, when watching Waller, he didn't seem to be 100% healthy. I believe that also contributed to play a major factor as well, something that would concern me heading into this matchup. If he is 100% though, we should expect nothing less than a really solid game. He faces the Buffalo Bills, who are very strong at defending outside wide receivers, but across the middle of the field, they've been torn apart several times. Think Jamison Crowder in week 1. In week 2, Mike Gesicki had an incredible game, 8 receptions, 130 receiving yards. That was on 11 targets. 11 targets that can't be out of the question for Darren Waller. We've seen him get that type of volume before. Once again, my main concern is his overall health. While he doesn't carry any injury designation heading into this matchup, last week he did seem to be a step behind. The final tight end we have ranked inside the top 6 is Tyler Higbee. Higbee, after posting his 3 touchdown performance against Philadelphia, followed that up with a very disappointing game against Buffalo, but it did appear that the Buffalo Bills did scheme to try to limit his production. Even with that being the case, we have seen Higbee's snaps decrease in each game this season, even dropping to its lowest percentage in week 3 to a mere 73%. Ideally, for top tier tight ends, we want them to be playing on 80% plus, and if this trend continues, it will definitely increase the volatility of Tyler Higbee, but a 3-week sample just isn't enough to claim that. This week they face the New York Giants, who currently rank 25th in fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. I believe their ranking of a strong defense against tight ends more has to do with the level of competition they've faced thus far, as opposed to their true strength against that position. Pittsburgh, Chicago, neither one of those teams heavily relies on the TE position. San Francisco in week 3, they did not have George Kittle, so concerns for Higbee in this matchup wouldn't so much be about the strength of the defense. It would more so be that the LA Rams are nearly 2 touchdown favorites in this matchup, which, if that stands true, the overall passing volume in the second half of the game may not be so high. We're moving over to the next 6 tight ends. This would be the mid to back end TE1s. To start, we have TJ Hockenson, who's coming off a game in which he played his highest snap percentage of the season. Hockenson not only has been very efficient while he's been on the field, he also has the second highest passer rating while targeted in the TE position, and in week 3 tied Kenny Golladay for a team high in targets. Now he faces the New Orleans Saints, who currently allow the most fantasy points in the entire league to the tight end position. They have 2 games in which they've allowed over 100 receiving yards to tight ends, have also allowed at least 1 touchdown in each game this season, so Hockenson finds himself at a point where he is trending up to his highest point, also being met with the best possible matchup he could have. Kenny Golladay being available does not hurt him. I believe that helps him. So Hockenson owners should not only be excited to get him in the lineup, it's very likely he could have his best game of the season. Up next, we have Hunter Henry of the LA Chargers. One thing about Henry we should begin to understand is that it's looking like he is going to be more of a high floor option. He currently ranks 6th in targets at the tight end position, but so far he has not yet reached the end zone. No tight end who has as many or more targets has not yet scored besides him, and we could look at that as he is due for a touchdown, and maybe he is on the poor side of variance. But either way, when I'm looking for a player to fill any of my positions, I would much rather start a player who has a lot of volume and maybe hasn't reached the ceiling, as opposed to a player who has performed very well on a low amount of volume. This week against Tampa Bay, we can't really say it's a great matchup. Neither Noah Fant or Jared Cook, two pretty solid tight ends, had incredible days against them. Neither tight end was able to score either, so the odds of Hunter Henry breaking that trend of no receiving touchdowns, it may not be so likely in this matchup, but either way, he's a main contributor in this offense. He'll be used heavily in between the 20s, and for that, we have him as a mid to back end TE1. Mike Gesicki is the next tight end we have. He is currently coming off a game in which he only had one reception. Thankfully, it was for a touchdown, but he did only receive 3 targets. Now he finds himself in a matchup against Seattle. Seattle, not a very positive matchup for the tight end. Miami is expected to be trailing the entire game, listed as 1-score underdogs. The Seattle Seahawks are much worse against defending opposing wide receivers. Ryan Fitzpatrick, known for distributing the ball heavily to that position. There's likely to be a lot of receiving production on this team. How much of it will end up going to Gesicki? That's another question. Regardless though, he's done enough to warrant a TE1 start every week, and the Seahawks really haven't been faced with the level of talent that Mike Gesicki brings to the table, so it's possible he overcomes the poor matchup. Jamal Adams has also been ruled out, which increases his floor and his ceiling. All we're going to say though is just temper your expectations for him this week. The next tight end we have is Dalton Schultz of the Dallas Cowboys. This is a player who is on a premier offense, which always increases your opportunity to score. The only problem with that though is that it's a good offense because they have a lot of really talented weapons. The overall volume in the passing game is pretty much negated by the fact that there are a lot of options for him to pass to. Dalton Schultz in week 2 did get 10 receiving targets. In week 3 against Seattle, that did drop down to 6 targets, but we do know the Seattle Seahawks, they're not a great start when it comes to tight ends. The matchup against Cleveland this week is a much easier matchup, pretty much night and day. The Cleveland Browns were destroyed both in weeks 1 and week 2, allowing 3 touchdowns between those 2 games. They currently allow the 3rd most fantasy points to the position as well. So if Dalton Schultz is able to carve himself out a little bit of the target market share this week, he should have no problem performing as a TE1. What I will also say is that he has not yet played a game in which he has eclipsed 70% of snaps, so while he has been looked at as a high floor option at the tight end position, whenever a player is playing on such a limited snap share, it will always increase their week to week volatility. The next tight end we have is Austin Hooper, playing on the other side of the ball in the Dallas versus Cleveland game. His situation is pretty much the opposite of Dalton Schultz, where Schultz is receiving a pretty solid amount of targets on a very small snap share. Austin Hooper is playing a very sizable snap share, but not really receiving the targets. There are only 5 tight ends that play on a higher snap percentage than Hooper, yet he still does not have a game in which he has received more than 4 targets. If there was a game for him to break that trend though, it would certainly be this week. In order for the Cleveland Browns to keep up with this high-powered Dallas offense, they're going to need to get all of their weapons involved, and when it comes to Dallas and how they defend the tight end position, they've definitely been in the bottom third of the league. They have allowed a touchdown in each of the last 2 games to the tight end position. On average, are also allowing nearly 6 receptions per game to that position as well. And with reports of Odell Beckham maybe having an injury earlier this week, while he currently does not stand on any injury report right now, if anything did happen to Odell, potentially knocking him out of this game, then Austin Hooper instantly would be a main contributor for this passing offense. The final tight end rounding out the top 12 is Hayden Hurst, and I'll be honest, I'm a bit concerned with Hurst right now. And no, it's not just because he had 1 reception for 1 yard and 1 touchdown last week, saving his game from being a complete bust, but no, it's because his snap percentage has dropped considerably from week 1 now to week 3. In week 1, he played on 79% of snaps. Week 2, that dropped to 65%, and week 3, now it's down to 62. We know last week Atlanta didn't come out with all of their weapons either. Julio didn't play. That should have increased the overall opportunities for Hurst, yet he only had 3 targets. If this is a trend that does continue, it's very likely Hurst would be impossible to trust in good matchups. And if the entire league becomes aware of this fact, then he may not even have any trade value either. As for this game though, he isn't coming into a great matchup against the Green Bay Packers. They have still yet to allow a receiving touchdown to the tight end position. Jared Cook basically busted last week. TJ Hockenson, he didn't have a great game against them either. Only one game this season was a team even able to get over 39 receiving yards to the tight end position. So if the injured Julio Jones and injured Calvin Ridley both suit up for this matchup, it's possible Hayden Hurst has a very low floor. We're moving over to the final 6 tight ends. A few names here we don't normally hear of, but to start we have Evan Engram. Admittedly, it is odd seeing Engram ranking outside the top 12, especially when he's healthy, but eventually we have to come to the realization that the production just isn't lining up with his name value. He only has 11 receptions, not even 100 receiving yards, and through 3 games still has remained scoreless. In his defense, it hasn't been the easiest 3 games so far to start. Pittsburgh, Chicago, followed by San Francisco. That's going to limit the production of nearly any tight end, but there still has been other tight ends who have been able to post better games against those defenses. So while not all of it can fall on his shoulders, we do have to be aware that maybe our expectations for Evan Engram are just a little bit too high. Coming into this matchup though, it will be his easiest one yet. He faces the LA Rams, who just allowed 3 touchdowns to the position just a week ago against Buffalo. So if there were a game for him to potentially come back and show us a glimpse of what we had seen from him in previous seasons, this definitely would be the one. But until we start to see it on the field, we can't just come in expecting that production. Up next, we have Alie-Cox of the Indianapolis Colts. His matchup this week against the Bears, it's about middle of the pack, so our ranking for him outside of the top 12 is more so that he has a solid connection with Phillip Rivers. His snaps, while overall trending upward, he is competing with other tight ends to see the field time, so his overall floor, it will be a bit low. When targeted though, he has been nothing short of amazing. Of his total 11 targets, he's caught 10 of them. He was able to reach the end zone last week, and if he continues to play as well as he has been, there is no doubt that his field time will go up. Until that happens though, we do have to rely on him being efficient and hope that he does see a solid amount of volume. While not guaranteed, it definitely makes him a better option than some others on the waiver wire. So if you're desperate just to fill the spot this week, maybe you lost Jared Cook or you had Jonnu Smith, then Alie-Cox, he's not the worst option out there. Up next, we have Jimmy Graham, who's coming off of a phenomenal performance last week. He received 10 targets, converted that into 6 receptions, 60 yards, and even scored twice. It will be interesting to see how the transition to Nick Foles does play into his production. I do believe overall it will help all of the weapons in this offense, but we may not get to see it on full display this week. Unfortunately, he plays Indianapolis. The Colts currently allow the fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. Through 3 games this year, they've allowed a grand total of 6 receptions, a mere 32 receiving yards, and no receiving touchdowns. Even if he does have a poor performance in this game, I wouldn't be quick to drop him. It may not show exactly all we need to see, but if he does have a high amount of targets, plays on a high amount of snaps, it will bode very well for his potential in the future. Next, we have Tyler Eifert, and if you're that desperate where you're starting Tyler Eifert, you gotta know you could leave this week with a mere 3 fantasy points in your TE position, but Tyler Eifert does have some potential here, not because the Cincinnati defense is all around horrible against tight ends, it's just that they are much better against wide receivers, 5th best when it comes to allowing fantasy points to be exact, more middle of the pack when it comes to guarding tight ends, and in a game where there's a very high over-under, which is now pushing 50 points, it's very likely that Gardner Minshew may have to rely on the options that are available. That option is likely going to be the TE position, and Tyler Eifert is going to be the man filling it. So this week, I wouldn't say he has a high ceiling or a high floor, but he could be a spot start in deep leagues or more of a DFS play. The next tight end we have is Robert Tonyan of the Green Bay Packers. This is going to be a play against the health of the overall receiving core of the Green Bay Packers if Devontae Adams doesn't play. Rodgers has to throw to somebody. We already know Allen Lazard, he's out indefinitely, leaving MVS as the potential leading receiver if Adams were not to play. So Robert Tonyan, who received 5 targets a week ago, could carve himself out a major role. This is a game against the Atlanta Falcons, which has one of the highest projected totals of the entire week. So when you factor in the amount of opportunity that's potentially available and the overall scoring that is expected in this matchup, Robert Tonyan may just back himself into a position that is very, very valuable. The final tight end we have is Adam Trautman. This is also a play on the lack of health for the New Orleans Saints. Michael Thomas has already been ruled out. Jared Cook also ruled out. So Trautman taking over the vacated position of Jared Cook has some potential upside in this matchup. It's not expected to be a game with a high projected total, at least not as high as the Green Bay Packers versus Falcons game, which does limit the overall upside for him. But as good as Jared Cook has been while leading this team from the TE position and knowing that Trautman will be taking over that slot, Michael Thomas is not there, the opportunity for him to score and have a good game, it's undeniable. But guys, that's going to do it. We just went over the top 18 tight ends heading into week 4. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.